The food industry spends billions making ultra-processed foods irresistible. It's probably not a shock to you. But what if completely avoiding them isn't the answer? I'm a personal trainer and nutrition coach and am intuitive eating focused as well. Today, we are diving into how to break free from the guilt-restrict-binge cycle and then find peace with processed foods, using what we know from intuitive eating and relying on what we know about ultra-processed foods. You'll learn practical strategies to enjoy ultra-processed foods while still honoring your health and well-being. Stick around. About a year ago, after having tons of conversations with a variety of people and just doing my own introspective work and learning and really understanding the science and the data behind dieting and diet culture, I officially declared this a podcast focused on intuitive eating. At the same time, I also have a fascination with food and nutrition and how food impacts our bodies, and have been just in my mind percolating this relationship of ultra-processed foods and our health and how that goes in with intuitive eating. I think that is a big misconception that we've had a couple different conversations on this show about. There's this misconception that intuitive eating is like, oh, just eat whatever you want, whenever you eat, whatever it is, like whatever. That's not how it is. And that's not what I've learned from the intuitive eating dietitians who have been on, those who have had that extensive training. Full disclosure, I have not. However, I have tried to learn a lot, and who knows, that may be something that I do in the future. One of my favorite quotes from the intuitive eating series I did back in season 21 was from Kristen Williams, and I posed this question about ultra-processed foods, and she said, look, I care very much about health, otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Kristen is an amazing registered dietitian and helps her clients overcome eating disorders or disordered eating, and really has a good balance and understanding of that. And it has gotten me just thinking more and more about, like, how does this fit in? How does, in my world, Amy's world, how does processed and ultra-processed foods in particular, and I'm going to get into that just in a second, how do those coexist in my world with intuitive eating and what I know about how these foods react in our body and the potential health implications that we can have? So today we're actually going to cover a lot. Number one is I want to briefly cover the NOVA classification of processed foods. There's actually 4 different levels of it. And let's get very clear what we mean when we talk about ultra-processed foods. And you'll understand and learn why this is why I'm very specific when I say ultra-processed and not just processed. I want to talk some about the benefits of processed foods, including ultra-processed foods, because I don't think that this gets enough airtime in the scope of this conversation. We'll talk some about why ultra-processed foods are under attack. We'll talk about how ultra-processed foods fit into the intuitive eating lifestyle, and we'll specifically talk about restricting them and does that work. And finally, I will share how I incorporate this with intuitive eating. Like I said, I am not a certified intuitive eating coach, so let's jump in, because as usual, when I start to do my research, I tend to get a lot of information, and now I have a lot that I want to share with you. So let's go ahead and jump in. First of all, let's talk about the NOVA classification of foods. There are 4 categories. Number 1, and I'll go through these relatively quickly. Number 1 is unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So these foods obviously undergo minimal processing, like you couldn't be able to tell from that. They remove like inedible parts. They apply methods like drying or crushing or pasteurization without adding chemicals like sugar or salt or oils. This is like your fresh produce. This is wheat and rice. This is legumes like beans and lentils, dairy products like milk and yogurt without added sugars, meats, fish, eggs, pasta, nuts, spices. All All of these, what I would consider, and I would put under these like whole foods category. Like if you can hold it in your hand and know where it came from, then that's probably a category 1 food under the NOVA classification. Number 2 is processed. It's called processed culinary ingredients. So basically it's taking these category 1 foods and using culinary ingredients with it to cook or season or prepare. Group 2 foods include salt and sugar and honey and butter and vegetable oils. So these foods are rarely consumed just on their own. I mean, maybe if like you're taking honey for your allergies and you're doing a little bit of that every day, but for the most part, like we combine these with something else. So that is your group 2 processed culinary ingredients under NOVA. Category 3 is processed foods. So this is basically when you combine group 2 substances like the salt and sugar and honey and butter and oils with a group 1 food. If you were to take a red pepper and cut it up and saute it in some olive oil, that would actually turn into a group 3 processed food. Technically, it's a processed food. We're starting to drill down so you can understand like, oh, this is why Amy's so intent on saying ultra processed. Foods that fall into the category 3 are like canned vegetables, canned fruits and legumes, salted nuts, cured meats, cheeses, freshly baked breads. Also, your alcoholic beverages like beer and cider and wine are part of this category 3 processed foods. Category 4 is ultra processed food and drink products. These are generally characterized by having 5 or more ingredients, and they will often include unusual additives not commonly found in like just basic whole food eating. So those are going to be when you hear about like words that you can't pronounce or you don't know, like that's going to be in an ultra processed. That's going to be in a category 4. They also contain little to no group 1 components or category 1 components, but they try to mimic or mask those sensory quality of those foods. So these are going to be like your non-sugar sweeteners. And yes, for my stevia friends out there, I know I have my stevia in my coffee every morning. Yes, this is one of those as well. We're also talking about hydrogenated oils, casein, whey. The goal of the ultra processing is to create like ready to eat or drink items. And it goes through a long process to do that. I actually found this definition on Wikipedia that I really like. And so I'm just going to read it to you here from Wikipedia. It's industrially manufactured foods that are designed to be convenient, palatable, and affordable. These foods often contain multiple ingredients and additives such as preservatives, sweeteners, colorings, and emulsifiers, which are not typically found in home kitchens. They tend to be low in fiber and high in calories, salt, added sugar, and fat. Common examples include packaged snacks, soft drinks, ready meals, and processed meats. So this is why, for the scope of this conversation, and when I'm having this discussion, I try to use the word ultra processed because, again, if you saute a red pepper in olive oil, technically that's category 3 processed, and that's not what we're talking about. Category 3 is not what I'm talking about in the scope of this conversation. I'm talking about the ultra processed foods that have gotten a lot of attention recently, and rightfully so. I think it's good that we are having this discussion. I think that is a good lead-in to the second point that I want to make in this conversation, which is the benefits of ultra processed foods. Yes, there is a lot of conversation right now about how ultra processed foods can be harmful to our health. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, but I think it's worth at least acknowledging some of the benefits of ultra processed foods. The reality is, ultra processed foods help feed people. We are a growing global population and we need to feed people. It is very difficult under our current circumstances to feed people on a whole food diet. And it is such a complex measure, but I think that is one thing. Ultra processed foods are also really helpful for those who have food insecurity. They can obtain these, they can go to the grocery store, they can go on the inside of the grocery store, they can get their packaged stuff, and they will actually have enough food, or they can have food that is available to them. Ultra processed food is prepared in mass quantities, and because of that, they're able to lower the cost on a per unit basis. This is an important part of the puzzle of figuring out ultra processed foods, because not everybody can afford the things on the outside perimeter of the grocery store that we have heard. Those are your things like your fresh fruits and your vegetables and your meats and your dairy and your eggs. Affordability is a real issue, especially right now in America's economy. Inflation has been up so much. So the affordability of ultra processed foods is something that I think we need to remember. They're also helpful in vulnerable populations. There is a lot of safety in the process of creating these foods through sterilization and preservation techniques. And this can reduce your foodborne illness risk in these vulnerable populations. Another thing is some of them are fortified with essential nutrients. You see this a lot in your cereals. Your cereals have added nutrients, and that is helpful for populations who may not be getting all of their nutrients and their micronutrients from a wide variety of plants. Finally, they're convenient. There are absolutely times that it makes sense to grab something because it's convenient and it's accessible, and we don't have time to go home and make a whole food meal and all of that. We just need to fuel our bodies, because our bodies need carbohydrates, they need proteins, they need fats. And we may not get a perfect combination in every time we eat. Sometimes we just need the convenience of grabbing something, even if it's at the gas station, and eating that, because our body needs fuel. I've done it. I hope you've done it. It's okay to do that. It's probably not news to you that ultra-processed foods are under attack. Why? Why are they under attack? This could be I think that there's probably entire podcasts like with multiple episodes focused on this. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time here. But one of the reasons is it's the composition of a lot of these foods. They're often very high carb, they're very high fat, they are often high in sugar or salt or both, and they are very highly palatable, which means that they taste delicious and then we want more. So then we start eating more. Well, part of the problem with that, there's no problem with eating like more grapes or more almonds, but because of the way that the ultra processing works, it is designed for quick absorption into the digestive system that leads to this really rapid dopamine release in the brain. So a lot of this is how our brain is responding. Our brain gets that quick hit of the highly palatable, it's often called hedonistic as well, of like, this is delicious, this is so good. Like think about biting into a Snickers bar. I think of the middle school kids I know who all like, I think they call them hot chips, like super hot flavored Fritos, or like the super hot Cheetos, or I don't even know what they're called. That's not my thing. But that gives a lot to the brain. That gives that really quick hit to the brain. And so then it's like more. And these types of food, according to Medical News Today, that evokes similar levels of extracellular dopamine in the brain to those seen with addictive substances such as nicotine or alcohol. So basically, they activate that neural reward system, the brain saying, yes, 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 more, to a similar magnitude as nicotine and alcohol. So that's something to be aware of, and we're going to talk about awareness here in a minute. Before I go on to how ultra-processed foods and our knowledge of how they can be harmful, I want to just pause and recognize that this is a systemic problem. My mind goes to the single mom who's working 2 jobs. She's got her kids in the car. They're hungry. She's hungry. She's rushed. She just needs to give them a yes, and she needs to get food in their bodies. And so she's driving through any one of the fast food chains. Take your pick. This is a challenge with a very complex solution. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know exactly how to do it, but I do know that the problem is not necessarily like just give everybody a bunch of fresh fruits and vegetables and meats and they'll cook dinner. I listened to a podcast, probably a year and a half ago called Leftover, which looks at the systemic shortcomings of the National School Lunch Program. And in one of those, I highly recommend that series, by the way. It's just like 6-part. It's investigative, very well done. One of the things that has stuck with me since I listened to it is when they were interviewing parents who were providing their children a lot of ultra-processed foods in their diet beyond the school lunch program. Most of them said, I know this is not what's best for them. Health was not the driving factor, and they knew that that was not what was best for them. However, these were families that were in low socioeconomic areas. They were struggling in so many different areas. And the parents, and particularly the moms, were constantly having to tell their child, no, you can't get new shoes. No, we can't afford this. No, we can't do that. And saying yes to ultra-processed foods was an easier yes. It was something they could do. That's just one small piece of this very complex puzzle when it comes to ultra-processed foods. And so I won't camp out here for too long, but I just have to pause and say, this is complex. This is a very complex nationwide issue that is not easily resolved, in my opinion. Now, as I mentioned, about a year ago, I said, okay, we are an intuitive eating focused podcast. And if you want to either learn about intuitive eating or learn about it from a faith-based, Christ-centered perspective, go back and listen to season 21 of the Grace to Health podcast. And I take all 10 principles and interview people who are much smarter and much wiser in intuitive eating than I am. That was really helpful in my journey, and I had a lot of great feedback in that as well. So that's season 21. It started in June of 2024, if that helps you find it. But principle 10, which there are 10 principles and they more or less build on each other, is gentle nutrition to honor your health. So I'm just going to quote what it says from the Intuitive Eating website, which is make food choices that honor your well-being, taste buds, and culture while attuning to how your body feels. Remember that you don't have to eat perfectly to be healthy. You will not suddenly get a nutrient deficiency from one snack, one meal, or one day of eating. It's what you eat consistently over time that matters. It might be surprising for you to learn that what you eat and how you move your body only accounts for 10% of your health. Progress, not perfection, is what counts. So absolutely, we can take what we know about ultra-processed foods and apply that. But that's where I got stuck. That's where I got wait a minute, but if I can have all of the Cheez-Its, and I say Cheez-Its because that is something that I really enjoy, then where does that fit into the gentle nutrition? Where does that fit into me honoring my well-being? Because if I ate Cheez-Its all day long, well, then I'm not getting the protein that I need. And we've talked about protein for those of us in perimenopause and beyond. I am not getting the nutrients that I need. I'm not getting the fiber that I need. I'm not getting the variety that I need. And so how does this all fit in? Because the other part that I have learned in this process is restricting ultra-processed foods. It doesn't work. What I have heard in wellness culture is this is bad, ultra-processed, no, bad, don't ever eat. You'll die if you have Cheez-Its. Basically, people are getting so dramatic, especially on the socials. I mean, I'm not on TikTok. Every now and then I see something or other. It is the wellness industry has lost its mind. And yes, I will be having an episode with a guy I just really adore online. And so he's coming on. We're going to talk about this soon. The wellness industry has lost its mind. And they're telling you that if you have ultra processed foods, you will die, basically. But what happens if we restrict it? Well, guess what? That actually only triggers a cycle of binging and restricting. And this is per the National Institutes of Health. This is a reputable organization. This is where I will go to do a lot of my research, including today's research. And in fact, the same article in the NIH said that restricting can activate the brain's stress system, which causes anxiety and withdrawal-like symptoms, and then it will lead you to overeat the forbidden foods whenever you get a chance. So it creates this cycle. It creates just this vicious cycle. So first part of the cycle is restriction. So you're limiting. No, I will die if I have ultra processed foods. And then number 2, you get increased cravings. You're like, oh, I really want those Cheez-Its. But no, I can't have them, but I really want them, but no, I can't have them. And so it just leads to this, not only hunger, but just preoccupation with food. I mean, I know surely I'm not the only one who has thought in the past, I'm not going to have this. And then that's all I could think about is whatever that food was. So then when you get it, what happens? I'm only going to have it this once. And so I'm going to eat all I have. And tomorrow I'm not going to have any more. And so you get into this binge, right? And you will eat more than what your body is needing if you are in this restriction cycle. You're probably going to eat too much. You're probably not going to feel well. And then you're probably, number 4, going to feel a lot of guilt and shame about it. So you eat too much and you're like, oh man, I feel so guilty. I am bad. I had bad food. I am bad. Like we get into that guilt and shame cycle. And then from there, number 5, renewed restriction. I'm never having this again. I'm never going to have the ice cream again. I'm never going to eat the fast food again, whatever. And then it just continues on. So when we restrict, this is what is happening in our body and our mind. And no, thank you. No, thank you. This is not healthy. This is not healthy. So what do we do and how do we incorporate this with intuitive eating? I will say this, I'm just sharing with you what works for me and my mindset around it and my approach. This is not the only way, but when I am coaching people on adding ultra processed foods into their diet while stewarding their body well, while making choices that will provide for more nutritionally dense and getting a wide variety of carbohydrates and proteins and fats and like making all of the choices that will honor our health, however, still having those ultra processed. This is my approach, and this is what I will share with clients and people who ask me. So number 1, it's not about can you have them, it's about when and how. So yes, if you want the Cheez-Its, you can have the Cheez-Its. This is how I approach it when I'm home. Number 1, I will pair it with a protein. I will often have, if I have Cheez-Its, which I just finished some off because I had a whole lot of the ultra processed stuff over the holidays because my boys were home and they wanted snacks and they like enjoying fun things and I'm going to give that to them. But then I had Cheez-Its left over and we had Goldfish left over and we had Oreo. Well, the Oreos were not left over. Those went really fast. But you get the point. Like we've had Oreos left over sometimes. So I will pair that with a protein if I'm just eating it on its own. So if it's a snack for me, then I will have like Cheez-Its and almonds or Cheez-Its and peanuts or something like that. So I'll often add a nut or a seed to go with it. So that way, not only am I getting those carbohydrates, because yes, carbohydrates are good for you. They fuel your brain. However, I'm also getting some protein and fiber and fat with the food that I'm doing it. If I'm not really wanting a snack, but I'm wanting it as part of my meal, then I will generally try to eat it after a meal. For me, the ultra processed foods come in at lunch. With dinner, I don't know, I just don't really crave them as much after dinner, but I want them at lunch. Like there's this brand of chips called Julio's. It's a Texas thing, I think. I don't know that it is nationwide. In fact, my parents came to visit one time and my parents live in Oklahoma and my dad was like, okay, I can't find these anywhere in Oklahoma. Next time you come up, will you bring some to me? So we did that. We brought him several bags of it. If you ever get a chance to try Julio's, it's delicious. They're so good. if I open a bag, then I will tend to fall into this entrapment of what ultra processed is intended to do. And it's just the brain. Yes, more, 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 more. And so what I've learned is if I have the Julios, or when I have the Julios, I'll have it after I eat. And after I eat means I typically have had a well-balanced meal, again, with protein, with some fiber. Sometimes I will like not have, like if I'm having a salad or something like that, that's going to be more protein and vegetable heavy. And then the carb is the chips. So I will have it after I've already had some more nutrient dense foods. I have had some fiber that has filled me up. And so my brain is kind of already operating at a more satiated level rather than I'm starving, give me food, give me food, give me food. Another thing I have learned is it is very hard to eat mindfully, which is also part of the intuitive eating process, and really paying attention and savoring what I'm eating if I'm just standing in the pantry with my hand in the bag and like hand to mouth, hand to mouth. Hand to mouth. I shared about this in my episode 50 Lessons I've Learned in 50 Years, because I just turned 50 a few months ago. And surprise, surprise, it's hard to eat mindfully if you're standing in the pantry. So you can go back and listen to that episode if you want to hear any of the more or any of the other lessons I've learned in 50 years. But if I'm going to have it, take it out, sit down with it, like put some on there, and then just enjoy it. And maybe even go another step and say, okay, I'm just going to put these on my plate or on a napkin or in a paper towel or something like that and enjoy them. And then go back for more if you want more, but don't have them so easily accessible. I saw a stat years and years ago. I wish I could quote the source, but it was something to the effect of you are less likely to go back for seconds if your food is more than 6 feet away from where you are sitting. So if you want to add another little element of just making sure that you are paying attention to yourself, put the Julios 6 feet away from you. You can go back there. You're not restricting, but you're just making it not quite as easily accessible as if it was like right in front of you on the kitchen table. The other thing that's been helpful to me is recognizing that these foods are intended to be those quick hits and intended, yes, to provide some nutrition, yes, to provide fuel, but also the process is designed for you to eat more. That's what they want you to do, right? Is to eat their product. So the best example I can think of is an infomercial. So I know that a lot of you are my age and older. I think you'll remember this. I think you'll remember turning on the television on a Saturday afternoon at 3:00 and nothing is on, and finding an infomercial. And it said, like on the TV guide, like infomercial. You knew that this was an infomercial. And you knew that they were going to be selling you something. But you were sucked into that story and you're like, yeah, I do need that makeup. Oh, Cindy Crawford uses that makeup? Yes. Oh, I do need this. I do need this. And of course, you pick up the phone at the end and you call, because if Cindy Crawford is wearing this makeup and there's all these compelling stories and everybody has these life-changing experiences from this makeup, then yeah, I want some of that as well. You knew when you were watching that infomercial that they were going to sell you something. You know, when you dig into the bag of whatever your ultra-processed food is, you know that it's wanting you to eat a lot of it. So be aware of that. I talked earlier about the awareness. Be aware of that and calm down and pause and savor and enjoy it, rather than numbing out to the quick dopamine hit of your brain without even thinking about it. And when I say numbing out, like that is a common side effect of binging. Like you just don't even know that you're doing it. But even if you're not like technically binging, but you're just, and I do this too, you guys. This episode is just as much for me as it is for you, because all of this It's like when I used to teach group fitness classes, and I would be leading people and I would give them a form check and I would say, I cue because I do, because I would notice, oh, I'm doing it wrong. And so then I would cue other people so they weren't doing it wrong either. So I am cueing because I'm doing with this as well. And I'm noticing it. So this is just part of my own process and I'm just passing it along to you. So please make sure that we are well on the same page with this. I have noticed with some foods that I will start to turn into this like hand to mouth, and then I'm like, oh, actually I've had enough. And so just kind of having that backstop or just a pausing and checking in often will reveal that I've had enough and I don't need more and I'm not hungry and like I've enjoyed it and I don't really need any more. Now, what happens when I'm either out and away from home or I'm traveling? I remember getting my oldest son when we were at Target. We literally had 2 baskets of stuff for him to go to college. He was going to college out of state and we were like loading everything up. We were in Target for 2 hours. I was starving by the time we were done. So in the checkout line, I reached over, I grabbed a Snickers, and I'm walking out with me pushing one cart and my son pushing the other cart out to the car, and I'm just chomping along on a Snickers because I was hungry. So the first thing I would say is if you're out, if you're traveling, if you have ultra processed foods, just go with it. That was not the end of the world that I had a Snickers bar at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because I was really hungry. Shoot for balance the rest of the day. Shoot for variety the rest of the day. So with that Snickers, I don't know what I had for dinner, but I probably was like, okay, I might want to have some more vegetables. I might want to have a little bit of fiber. Again, if I could have, if that was not accessible to me, just like they say in the intuitive eating book with gentle nutrition, like one meal, one day is not going to wreck your health. It's just not. So it's just, as my kids would say, it's not that deep. It's just not that deep. But when possible, if I end up having fast food for lunch, well, I'll choose a salad or extra vegetables for dinner or something like that. So I'm just trying to balance out the day, not necessarily the meal. If the meal is not perfect, that's okay. How can we balance out the day? Or maybe it's the week. If you have several days of traveling and it's just not possible, that's okay. Let's look at the consistent behavior. Let's look at the trend. I've talked before about what's a trend. We don't need a tenet. Don't need like one sharp single thing. It's what is the trend. And then finally, if you feel like you have a complex relationship with ultra processed foods, if the wellness culture on Instagram is making you feel guilt or shame, number 1, it's time to unsubscribe to that wellness culture. And number 2, it's time to release that. There is no place for guilt or shame in feeding our bodies. Of course, we want to give it a variety of foods that contain proteins and fats and carbs. We want to choose nutritionally dense foods that come in your plants, which is your vegetables, of course, but also your fruits and your nuts and your seeds and your legumes. And we want the dairy when we can have it, or for those of you who can have it, we want to choose those things because that does honor our well-being. But also honoring our well-being means not sitting in the shame of eating your Snickers and feeling guilty because you also had Julio's for lunch that day. It means that you had some food to eat and you can have different foods later. The end. It's really that simple. It's really that simple. What I would love to know is how you incorporate processed foods into your intuitive eating lifestyle. What did I miss? Is there something that you do that you want to share? If so, if you're watching on YouTube, then just put it in the comments. And if you are listening on your podcast, then you have an option on there that says like, have a question, click here or something like that. Click there and it's just a text, which by the way, you can text anything to me. So you can text like, I totally disagree with you, Amy, and that's okay. Or you can say, hey, this was helpful. That's always that's even more than okay, but it's whatever you want to do. So those are a couple ways. I would love to hear from you how you do that. If I get enough of them, I will include them in our Friday 5 Nourishing Notes journal, where I send you 5 things that I'm loving in terms of food and movement, and maybe it's scriptures or something like that. And if I get enough of them, I will put those in there. And if you don't get that Friday 5 journal, you can sign up over at gracedhealth.com/monthly-updates. And that's GRACED health, all one word, /monthly-updates. Okay, that is all for today. Go out there and have a graced day.